Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
I'm Luke Edwards, Associate Director of Church Development. My role at the conference is focused on cultivating fresh expressions in dinner churches. In my last appointment, I helped launch a network of fresh expressions in Boone. As this network was getting off the ground, I began to look for models to base our small gatherings upon. I did some reading around house churches. The appeal of the early church model drew me in, but the modern house church movement was anti-denominational, anti-clergy, and held some pretty problematic beliefs. Fresh expressions ended up being a better fit for us. However, within the past few years, mainline churches have begun to discover the power of house churches in adapting to our increasingly post-Christian society. This movement has exploded with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. It only took a few weeks of Zoom church with a wild toddler for me to realize that our family needed a different way to be a part of the church in this time. We reached out to a few friends, and a small backyard house church was born. So what is a house church? Dave Barnhart, an ordained elder in the North Alabama Conference, who leads a house church network, defines a house church in his newly published book, Church Comes Home, which I highly recommend. He writes, "A house church is a worshiping community whose primary gathering happens in a private home or public place that is not primarily a worship space. There may or may not be a sermon. There may or may not be music. Prayer, conversation, sacrament, and the act of hospitality itself may be emphasized more than sermon or music." Several churches across the Western North Carolina Conference have started house church networks since the onset of the pandemic, and countless more are beginning to experiment with them in the coming months as the weather gets colder and outdoor worship gets harder. Today, we chat with Reverend Sam Burleson and Amy Cochran of Salem United Methodist Church in Bostic. We hear about the house church network that arose this year at their church and some of the lessons they've learned so far. I'm confident it will give you some helpful ideas for consideration as a difficult winter lies before us. Friends, here's Sam and Amy. Sam and Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Great to be here.
Hey, Luke. Thanks for having us.
Can you briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about Salem United Methodist?
Well, I am a relative newcomer to Salem as far as actual membership goes. I am a lifelong United Methodist, and I have been acquainted with Salem through various connections for many years, but just within the last year and a half, I guess, Sam actually began attending and became a member there. And as far as activities there so far, I have very much enjoyed mentoring during confirmation, engaging in small groups and dinner church, of course, pre-COVID, serving most recently on PPRC, and am looking forward to getting into some more applications of my spiritual gifts of hospitality, nurture, and communication over time. With regard to Salem itself, over the years of my acquaintance with the church and the church family, I have just always found it to be a very spirit-filled place and a welcoming place, and one that has been in the history that I've been exposed to, and is increasingly a place that is respectful of and aspiring to greater diversity, that is more and more representative of all of the family of God. And that's what ultimately drew me to membership there.
I don't need to say anything else after that. That's good. I want to be a part of Salem now. Amy is the relative newcomer to Salem, but I'm the relative newcomer to United Methodist Church. So first time attending a United Methodist Church a little over 3 years ago was the first time I pastored a United Methodist Church, and that's Salem. So it was a pretty exciting moment for me, and it's been an incredible journey since then. But yeah, I ditto a lot of what Amy said. I think Salem has this, it fits in this strange, unique world of diversity in the midst of a very rural context. It's not something you normally find in the middle of our small membership rural churches, but it is a space that, even though we care deeply for the community that surrounds us, within a mile or two radius, we really hope that love and that capacity to love expands out beyond that mile and two radius. And Amy's a perfect example of that. She doesn't live in that mile or two radius. She lives a good bit away from that. So, and that's what we hope, is that we can kind of share that vision for the entire county and region.
With Amy on PPRC, I know that Sam will be on his best behavior today on the podcast, so that's good. Well, I'm particularly interested to hear about your network of house churches that has arisen at Salem, and just could you tell us about how that idea came about and how it got started?
Yeah, I'll let Amy jump in a minute, because she came at kind of the invitation that I put out to the church. But it is, for me, this is something that I think kind of rested in my heart a long time before COVID. But COVID has this entire pandemic's created an incredible opportunity for creativity and vitality in the life of the church. And so in the first few months, of course, my mind just sort of ignited with like creative ideas and how we can go. And so when we first got to that stage of, okay, we can get back together in some capacity, this was early in the summer, 10 people or less, outdoors preferred. And then I saw that the bishop and the cabinet had discerned that one of our options should be small churches. I was like, or small house churches. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's it. And it's funny, but one of the first criticisms I offered very early on in the pandemic was, if we would just do church the way the early church did, we probably wouldn't have this problem. Like, there would be no shutdown, because we would be doing community together in these small, intimate ways. And I think, my own background, I come out of a pretty long history prior to coming in the United Methodist Church of attractional church models. So that's where I lived, dwelt. That's what I knew. And in many ways, that's still a lot of what I know. But there was a certain level of, holy dissatisfaction with that model, knowing that Christ has called us to go out into the world and not just to create some sort of program and presentation and that we're calling people to. And part of that is really deeply grounded for me in just the sort of core essential of community. Christ invites us into the community that's already taking place in amongst the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but he invites us into a new living holy community with each other. And I see that taking place in the house church in a much, much more real, tangible way than just coming sort of to that attractional model that invites you to come in, sit in the rows, and go home. And so it was sort of the perfect storm of sorts, where, the bishop and cabinet opened the option, and something that was already burning in my heart, I was like, that's it. That's what we need. And so I opened it up to the congregation to see who would participate. And Amy was one of those participants, for sure, to be a leader and jump on board, given her gifts and passions and those types of things. So I'll let Amy take it from there as to how she jumps in.
Well, it's interesting to hear you, Sam, give that description, because I saw myself as kind of a hesitant participant at first. for several reasons, but I admit to being not a little terrified at first, just because I kind of suffer from the Martha complex and had some concerns of, if I take this on, am I going to worry about, is my space adequate? Is it nice enough? Is there enough room? Am I going to have a lot of fretting about time commitment for weekly preparations, especially given the need for COVID related preparations and all of those kinds of things? Would I worry every week about having everything perfect? Those kinds of things. And again, that risk to my time availability. Was I willing to make that time available? And would that balance out? And whether I fully really realized it at the time or not, I think there was also a measure of fear, of vulnerability, of a different kind of connection, a deeper, potentially deeper level of connection that maybe I had not experienced recently. What would that open me up to? Even though at some level I realized that I was actually starving for that type of connection. So fortunately, I gave in. I'm very thankful that I did. I'm glad that Sam perceives it the way he does. His is much more favorable perception than my own, I think. And although those concerns, some of those initial concerns still occasionally kind of rear their ugly heads, really from the very first gathering of our little hub, much of that fell away. And in comparison to the richness that I have found in the experience, it simply, those things didn't matter. What mattered and what has filled my mind and heart were the faces in front of me in that group and the voices around me, and any imperfections in the situation simply lent more authenticity and texture to the experience and really allowed me to experience one of the most beautiful rewards, I think, of this worship format, and that is the realization that we can be imperfect but still be loved and still provide something of value to others.
That's beautiful. Sam, what has your role been as a senior pastor in this house church network?
So I think in the beginning, it was casting vision for how this could happen in the context of our congregation, and then setting up the formatting for it, and of course, building the team, training the team, and now at this point, it's kind of weekly handing material to the teams to make sure that they're well prepared for it, but also following up from time to time to just say, okay, so how are things going? What's working, what's not working. And one of the things that we started somewhat even apart from the house church, but I think the house churches are a great way for this to continue to flourish is the ability for house church leaders to funnel information that, like pastoral care information, back to me if necessary, about what's going on in their group, what they're seeing happening. And I say, though, when necessary, very intentionally, because I really firmly believe that a lot of what's happening in these groups, the pastoral care is rising in their midst and they're taking care of it. So it's not the pressure to just push it back on me as the senior point leader, but it really is becoming, these groups, they're becoming the body of Christ together, caring for one another in those spaces. And so sometimes it's necessary, but sometimes it's not. And I've said this for a long time there, if we would just tap in the natural care that we have for one another and stop sort of forcing that on to the senior leader, what we would discover is that the people that we do life with more consistently actually can offer greater levels of care than the senior leader who just popped in last conference year or whenever it may have been. God sort of created the body in that way. And like I said, sometimes it's necessary for the senior leader to come in that way. But the amount of care that can take place and we've seen take place has been pretty phenomenal in these groups. So yeah, persistently, I would say I offer some moments of care, but I also offer, I consistently hand material out to make sure that they're well prepared each week.
Yeah, so that kind of ties back to what Amy was talking about, some of her concerns that she had coming into that. So as a kind of senior pastor, how did you address some of those concerns? You've already kind of mentioned a few ways that you've done that. Maybe tell us more about what you hand to the leaders and yeah, just any other ways that you've tried to make it easier on the house church leaders.
Yeah, well, I Amy did a great job. I just want to jump back to what she said a few minutes ago. All the concerns that she raised and what, I don't know, she would say inadequacy that kind of came up in her, like that just, for me, sort of heightened the fact that she's the perfect person for this, because it's like all the things you're thinking of and trying to wrestle through are signs that you're asking questions based off a certain gift that's active in your life. That's what I've seen in her. But some of that particularly is COVID related, like how are we going to make sure that we're creating some safe environments and that everyone's well taken care of. They feel like it's secure. Something that was very important to me that we both talked about from the beginning. And I think this is, Amy can jump on this, but I remember this being one of our conversations, was what it means to truly be hospitable and how we kind of care for our house and our space. And, when we prepare our spaces, whether it be decluttering, cleanliness, the smells in the rooms, whatever it may be, because we go nose blind to all these things, we're actually creating a sense of welcome for other people who come. And that can be intimidating for a lot of people, because we don't know what we don't know about our homes. And we do, when we open the doors to our homes, we automatically create, this opportunity for judgment to come. But when we go out of our way to create that hospitable space, even in our primary residence, we are saying something about our level of care for the other, how much we want to go out of our way to make that person feel welcome. And I know that's Amy's heart. I also know that's a space where fear rises for a lot of people. And I think that's one of the reasons why we talked about it. So we went over things like, what to do to prepare your home, both in terms of cleanliness and that sort of thing, but also, what to do in order to prepare it, for COVID related safety, sanitation, those types of things. And then we delivered for the home little baskets that would have some of the items that they would need. So they had bottles of hand sanitizer, some masks, and then another item that we included was a candle. And Amy did a great job of setting up these sort of sacred spaces in her home, because I think another part of welcome, especially in a home environment, is to show the way that these sort of primary residences can become sacred space, which is hard for people because we're such a bifurcated society that it's easier for us. And some of the pull right now to say we need to reopen churches rests in that reality right there. We think that the church is a sacred space to go to instead of understanding theologically that all things are sacred. And part of the way we can do that is to, insert a candle, insert sacred objects, kind of reclaim the mundane and make it sacred. And so we handed some of those items out, but we also encouraged home leaders to do that, to create a very sacred sort of altar place where they could sit, put out images of our faith. So those are a few of the things that we process through in order to help leaders kind of get onboarded. Is there anything, Amy, I don't know if spoke a lot for you, Amy. So
that's great. Thank you, Sam. It was a perfect segue to some things that I would just kind of tag onto that. Sort of the icing on the cake, the thing that sealed the deal was exactly that set of preparations and those things that you just described that helped us to feel confident, that helped us to have a learning moment, that taught us that creating that safe space, addressing the COVID-related safety issues were indeed layers of hospitality or new elements of hospitality that further deepened our ministry to one another and our caring for one another. And that was just a precious way of looking at that for me. That really helped me to move forward into this process. And knowing that Pastor Sam had, visited my front porch when I wasn't even here and sat and prayed over this space, helped me to feel like that my home, that any space can be a holy space and a consecrated space. And again, gave a measure of confidence moving into those early meetings. Pastor Sam and Pastor Aaron together even did a video. They modeled creating those visual sacred spaces and those representations of our faith in our homes, which was precious to me personally, and also as we embarked on this house church journey. And so that enabled me and inspired me to incorporate some items into that sacred space that were meaningful to me and to other members of the group, things that had been a cross that was gifted to me when I joined the church by one of the other group families in our little house church, and those types of things, flowers that we shared with one another from our gardens each week. So all of those things contributed to that reciprocal ministry that we shared amongst ourselves each week in the house church.
I love that. Amy, can you tell us what a kind of a typical week looks like in your house church, kind of the order of how things happen and what it looks like?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I would really like to draw out that Sam touched on earlier is the two-way engagement that takes place that is a little different from some worship formats. And I believe that there's a place for all different formats, but this particular approach does allow for that two-way engagement. In other words, everyone is participating in giving and receiving, in speaking and hearing. And there is that pastoral care for one another and that question and answer and that check-in with one another. So typically a week would look like at the beginning, we just sort of do an informal check-in, greet one another, express care for one another, really sincerely ask, how has your week been? What's been important to you this week? What challenges have you had this week? Those types of things, a sincere check-in. Having a set of questions that kind of advance or escalate through a series of questions that, again, Sam has provided very, very clear, easy to follow, beginning with just a question to get everybody in the circle talking and kind of engaged, and then kind of raising the bar a little bit and posing a question that's provided for a few group members to maybe respond to, of course, whomever wants to, but it might not be that everyone wants to respond to those somewhat deeper questions, but an opportunity for at least a few of the members of the group to offer their own personal experience and kind of some more vulnerable insights and points, personal points. And then finally, what Sam refers to as a dig deep question, a question that you may not even answer in the session itself, but a really thought-provoking question to kind of wrestle with a little bit over the course of the week and give additional thought to. And all of those things are related to watching the sermon content that, of course, Sam also provides. So viewing that sermon content, listening to opening worship music, whatever the particular format of the given church may be. For us, it's opening worship music and the sermon content from Sam. And then relating those questions to that, having that discussion, and a closing prayer. And all of that is kind of done keeping community guidelines, established community guidelines in mind. What we found was that in the beginning, we kind of had a discussion around establishing those community guidelines and including the safety protocols and guidelines, and then just kind of referring back to those from time to time as needed.
Could you give an example of what one of those community guidelines might be?
Being respectful of each other's thoughts and opinions and what is shared, reminders about anything that might be confidential or sensitive, those kinds of things. And then, as I mentioned, the safety protocols, welcoming everyone to feel comfortable wearing their mask, not to feel self-conscious about that, to know that appropriate sanitation and sanitizing has been done, and to be, respectful of that hand sanitizer is available and clearly visible in the space. And so it kind of ranges from those, I guess, personal behavioral type things into the safety realm at this point.
That's great. Sam, I wonder, as you were kind of presenting the house church vision, how do you differentiate a house church from a small group or a Bible study?
So for me, a house church, one of the major differences between the two that I see is a house church is not grounded in sort of, the accumulation of additional knowledge, which many Bible studies are, a lot of small groups are. Now, I don't want to make that a blanket statement because I know some, like some Sunday schools, they do life together in a really sincere way, care for each other. They go above and beyond. Some small groups do the same thing. But generally speaking, sort of the core, even in the way we use those terms, Bible study or small group, like we're leaning on content. But in the context of a house church, we're not leaning on context on content rather. We're leaning on each other, and in that environment, we become the body of Christ, sort of lifting each other up, not only for our discipleship, but for our care for one another and our connection for one another. And then also, through expanding and reaching other people. For me, that's been one of the beautiful things about some of our other house churches. Across the board, you see different ones sort of like coming on board at different periods of time. And it's still difficult because it's, we're in this COVID season, and like one of our house churches, it's only a family of people, like extended relatives coming together. And that's fine. That's great. But they're doing life together. They're caring for each other. And as much as they can, they're reaching out to other people. And so I've seen that with some, my favorite story of all is this Sunday where a group of people were getting together, and one of the leaders actually of the group, they had a friend who had wanted to go to the church for a long time, and they really were about to do it right when COVID started. And then of course everything shut down and they just felt defeated. And he's like, dude, you can just come over to my house. And he's like, come to your house. I want to go to church. He's like, well, yeah, that's where it is. We're at our house. And so they came, they became a part of the group. And so I see this way in which, not only we offer care for each other, we do offer like opportunities for discipleship and growth, but we continue to grow the kingdom in this context context as well. And it is, especially for us in sort of lead pastoral roles, it becomes a little, tense because you're like, I'm not the one controlling the entire environment here. I don't know what's happening. But I love the moment where we can just sort of rely back on the Spirit of God to be the Spirit of God for us all, and direct us in this way. And so that's the main difference for me. It's not content driven, it's community driven. And each little hub becomes that community into themselves.
Do any of your house churches engage with children? I know that's a big question that a lot of folks have about house churches, is how they involve children in worship.
Yeah, I mean, Amy can speak to this in terms of having a few older, like teenagers, but all of our groups have. I think all of with the exception of one of our groups, they all had children. So we, from the beginning, sort of created some parameters, suggestions. Let me say it that way. We created some suggestions for how people could engage children in their house churches. And we gave those out as a part of the onboarding. And then every week we send out a link along with the email that says, hey, you've got kids in your group, if kids show up in your house church this week, here's some material. And based on how you as a house church have, decided to care for them, it may be that one person in the group steps out and cares for them. Or it may be that, you pause and create an environment for the whole group to care for them first, and then go on with the rest of the gathering. But either way, we're giving material and we're giving some general suggestions for how they can do that. So like I said, some groups, it has been that they've assigned a couple people who are already children's workers in the church, and they were, they'd gone through safe sanctuary training. So they pulled the kids out into another room, and they had an entire program for the kids in their house based on the material that we gave them. And then there's another church, house church, that they've got kids, and they do a program for the kids first, and the whole church surrounds them, and they do it in that environment. Now I know, like I said, Amy, you've got teenagers in your group, so it may be a little bit different for you, but yeah, that's how we've set it up.
Yeah, we have in our group, we have a family who has 6 young people in their household, sometimes 7, sometimes 8 or 10, depending on the weekend. And we have had a 4-year-old guest in their home who was with us some Sundays, who played at our feet, and we included her in all the ways we could. And she just was our bright spot on those Sundays. And in fact, she played at our feet with the puppies and the pets. So we even had our 4-leggeds there. We primarily in our group did have middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college age. And sometimes they would have additional friends in those age ranges. And it really became an opportunity for us to share with them that church doesn't always have to look just one way, and to have some very open conversations with them, almost as sidebars to the main content, about what's going on in your life, what's important to you right now, and have some just really great conversations with those young people around those topics, and as those topics related to the main content. I remember one particular week, one of the 7th grade youth just kind of made a comment about his feeling oftentimes like he was not going to be able to be successful at a given sport, academic situation, whatever the case may be. And so he just didn't try because he feared that he would not be successful. And that just started a whole really relevant and meaningful conversation with him and the group that we were able to tie into the main content and help him to feel supported and loved on within the context of church. And so those types of opportunities with our youth have been very, very valuable and meaningful.
That's a great point.
I love this. I want to piggyback on that real quick, because to me, this is one of the main advantages of house church. On any given Sunday, pastors, lead communicators get up and they speak, and they sort of hope that their words fly out there like buckshot and hit someone where they're at. But there's a way in which our home churches can be so targeted for us to be able to deliver the word of God to one another right where we actually are. Because it does become two-way, and we do learn how to listen and not just speak. And I think real life transformation can take places in those moments. And I don't want to belittle the way in which God uses us as preachers to preach. I love preaching. I love communicating in that way. But I recognize that on any given Sunday, I'm attempting to do something that sometimes I know situations that are out there, but a lot of times it's like I'm just imagining what's going on, and so that example that Amy gave is just a perfect example of how we can be so pointed in offering that transformation and growth and discipleship through house churches.
And we know that, God is going to find God's mark, whether it's through the senior pastor or through the community of the house church. It's going to happen. But it is, and there's a time and a place for all of the different formats, as I said earlier. But there is something that is just a different dynamic here and a different opportunity. It's that two-way engagement.
That's awesome. Well, what have some challenges been so far? How many months have y'all been doing it now?
Like, wait a minute, where are we? I don't even know what month it is. Where are we at? Is there an election somewhere around?
Time has stood still since March.
Which year of 2020 are we in? So we began early summer, and we started with 7 house churches. We now have 3. And of the ones that kind of fell off, really it was a lot of COVID related stuff. We had one of those house churches, the leader just moved during the pandemic. But other than that, the other ones were all COVID related, that just some fears that kind of came up as cases began to rise during the summer. And so that's where they've fallen off at this point. But from my perspective, there's 2 things that I would say have been challenging from a senior pastor perspective. One is just the pandemic that we're still in, because there is so much uncertainty. And even in the context of home churches, we're hearing here in the winter months of 2020, like, don't be in home gatherings. Like, that's the space that they're talking about now. So there's going to be more challenges that I think arise there. But even apart from the pandemic, the ability to continue as a senior leader to push this vision and share this vision over and over again. Some senior leaders have no problem with that sort of sheer repetition. I, on the other hand, have more of a problem with that. It's hard for me just to continue to say, hey, do this. This is power. This is a major way that we can connect with each other and connect with God. So that's a little bit harder for me, but I think it's absolutely imperative to their success is for and it doesn't have to be the senior pastor, but you have to have a central passionate voice or set of voices that will push that vision over and over again, so that people continue to jump on board and stay engaged in the process. So that's where we are right now. On the ground, Amy may have something else she'd like to offer, but.
Well, I think, it's key. That's a key thing. And And that repetition, sometimes I think we forget in the space of church and religious communities that we have some marketing to do, just like a business has marketing to do. We may call it witness, we may call it invitation, but the more that we can get out the messages and the visuals and the social media posts about the successes and the effectiveness and just the richness of what is going on, even if it's in one house church or 2 or 3 house churches, the more easily we will be able to maintain that momentum and sustain the energy. And I think that's probably one of the biggest or the biggest challenge out there, is just sustaining that momentum in the face of the real kind of safety type issues that Sam mentioned, as well as just as with any worship format, the times that there are going to be people who can't be present for various reasons. I've had to take a step back due to some kind of personal tragedy kind of circumstances, not to sound gloom and doom, but, we all have times when we can't be present for various reasons, and just finding ways to maintain momentum and to sustain in the face of those things. But the good thing with this particular format is there is also some flexibility there. So if perhaps a host has to step away for a time, maybe another family can take the lead and fill in. Or if there's a week when the whole group can't be physically together at their normal time, then you still have those questions that are out there. You still have that content guide. You still have that recorded sermon and worship music that the members of the group can view and talk together about throughout the week, whether it's virtually or via text or email or Zoom or what have you. So you don't necessarily always have to completely lose a week of meeting together and being together just because someone or some persons can't be present at the typical time. So that flexibility can really be beneficial in maintaining that momentum as well.
Yeah.
And overcoming that challenge.
So I hear you saying that it's important to, one, make the resources kind of easily available to the whole group, not just the leader, but two, to be spreading the burden of leadership throughout the group so that it can kind of respond when there's changes and adapt. And then Sam, I hear you saying too that just as with any kind of major paradigm shift in a church, that it's hard and not everybody's going to kind of jump on right away, and that it's going to take time for people to kind of digest it, internalize it, and then to kind of step out and try something new. So yeah, those challenges all make sense, and it sounds like y'all have found some good ways to respond to them. Well, as we wrap up, I noticed I put a little kind of feeler out on the conference Facebook group, and I noticed that there's a lot of churches that are on the cusp of trying out house church networks. I think probably because winter is coming, and some of the ways that our churches have gathered have been outdoors, and so they're trying to figure out what this long COVID winter is going to be like. And so I just wonder, what would you say to a church that's about to start a house church network or wants to try it? What advice would you give them? What pearl of wisdom would you give them? And would love to hear from both of y'all, and then we'll wrap up.
I know Sam is going to have something just very powerful to close with on this, so I'll give my brief lead in and then hand the reins to Sam. The one thing that came to my mind as I considered that question was, do not let fear hinder action, but instead let any fear, and it will be there, let any fear instead drive thorough planning and preparation that builds confidence and safety.
Yeah, that was great. I really love what you said, Amy. I would add one of the ways I think of about what Amy was saying there is I've been in so many churches that when presented with a problem, that there's usually just a stop. And in this season, like no other, perhaps, we've definitely been presented with a huge problem. And that doesn't mean we stop. That means we problem solve. And we have to become better problem solvers. Now, when it comes to house churches and the COVID winter, because I know that is where people are going, there's a couple things that I would sort of advise the churches to think about. One, moving to house churches is not taking your attractional model of church and transposing it to homes. This is a different model altogether. And so don't imagine that that's what's happening. It's not going to work if that's what you want to do, that you just want to sort of move it into a different space and break it up. There is something at its core that's a little bit different. And one of the ways that I've wrestled with this personally is to ask myself the question when I look at Scripture and when I look at the practices of the church is, what's the difference between the essence of the church and the manifestations of the church? And we have mistakenly thought for years and years and years that the physical manifestations of the church, the things that we see the church doing, gathering in buildings, putting up steeples, sitting in pews, singing songs, throwing on Christmas pageants, that is the church. And what really has happened in my heart and life through this season is that I've been pushed back and said, okay, but what is the essence of the church? Because there is no disease that's going to kill that. There's nothing that's going to change that in our world and our environment. And for me, small church gatherings like this, house church gatherings, this is answering the question of what the essence of the church is. And so be prepared for that, and be prepared that on the other side of it, people may find deep, meaningful connection with God there. And something's going to be transformed in their heart that the attractional church just won't fill anymore. And that's okay. I would be fine if we just sort of continued to grow in the context of house churches and didn't see this as just a solution to a COVID crisis, but as really pursuing the call of God to be who God wanted us to be as a community of faith. So yeah, that's my advice to churches looking to do this. Get ready for a big heart transformation there.
So it's not the solution to a COVID crisis. It is a COVID opportunity.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, Amy and Sam, thank you so much for taking time to be with us on the podcast, for sharing about the House Church Network at Salem. Grateful for the work that y'all are doing, and for just sharing your experience with our churches that are wrestling with this idea. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Luke. Hope you have a good one, man.
Thank you so much, Luke. It's been great to be able to have this opportunity to share our hearts with you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. If your church is interested in starting a house church network, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at ledwards@wnccumc.org. And please check out the show notes for some helpful links. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCC UMC. Once again, that's at WNCC UMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.